Welcome, sports fans. We're here for the finals of the US Wrestling Championships. The Genesis toughed it out in the European rounds, but I think it'll face some serious competition against the Nintendo Entertainment System today.
That's right, Jeff. Both contenders are in for a rough time. It really could go either way, but we're definitely in for some brutal wrestling in the ring this evening.
And here come the contenders. In the blue corner tonight, all the way from Japan, it's the Sega Genesis.
And in the red corner, also hailing from Japan, the Nintendo Entertainment System.
Both contenders look like they're in fighting mood tonight, Billy. The Genesis has the power advantage, but Nintendo have the hearts of the fans in this arena.
Wait, something's happening in Nintendo's corner. Someone's approaching the ring. Oh my god, I can't believe what I'm seeing, Todd. The NES is exiting the ring and a new contender seems to be taking its place. Holy shit, Frank, it's the NES's big brother, the Super NES. I think... Oh my god, it looks like the Super NES is fighting in place of its little brother. Can they Nintendo do that?
It looks like they just Nintendo did, John.
Well, this is remarkable. Never in the history of wrestling have I ever seen such a blatant disregard for the rules of this tournament.
The Genesis can't believe what it's seeing. The look of terror on its face is palpable.
And oh my god, the bell hasn't even rung and the Super NES is throwing punches at the Genesis. The ref shouldn't allow this, but it seems that he's bedazzled by the brutal display of the Mode 7 graphics from the Super NES. The Genesis can't take it. It's just trying to defend itself, but the Super NES is just way too strong.
This is just painful to watch, Jesse. The Genesis is getting pulverized out there.
You're absolutely right, Leonard. I think it's game over for the Genesis. There's the count. 1, 2, 3, and it's all over. The Genesis is down before the match has even officially begun. This is a sad day for the sports fan worldwide, Henry.
A sad day indeed, George, but the fans here with us tonight are in a frenzy, showing a great deal of support for the unsportsmanly behavior Nintendo has shown in this arena.
Well, for all its bluster, Sega has fallen to a mightier beast here tonight. All hail the new U.S. World Wrestling Champion, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System!
At the end of the 1980s, the Nintendo Entertainment System was falling behind to the powerhouse that was the Sega Genesis. Nintendo needed a new system to regain the console market. They needed to take things to the next level. They needed to start playing with superpower. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Retro Odyssey podcast. This is our Super Nintendo Entertainment System console special. It was my pick, so I'm hosting today. I'm Steven. I'm also joined by Adam, Matt, and Ryan.
Hello.
Hello there.
So, the SNES, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, the SNES. You all know it. Most of you love it. It was incredible. The Genesis whooped the NES, and Nintendo said, I heard you was talking shit, and slapped them with this. The Genesis came out a couple of years after the NES, and then like 2 years later, the Super Nintendo came out. At that point, it was all over but the shouting.
It's pretty fair to say that when it came out, the Mega Drive / Genesis was thoroughly punking the shit out of the NES.
Even in America?
That's where the popularity of Sega came from. They had that really good
Blast
commercials.
processing.
And you had a lot of people who were kind of bouncing off of Nintendo, and they're like, oh, Sega's so cool. The graphics are so good, because it released like a couple years after the NES. And it's edgy, and, 80s and the 90s, you had Sonic the Hedgehog, who was edgy and not a fat Italian mustachioed plumber. They hit all the right buttons with some super good marketing.
Yeah, the entire play for Sega with the Genesis was making it the cool console, which, it was...
Chili dogs!
Yeah, for older gamers that were, it would be the hardcore, quote-unquote, crowd today. It was the cool console. It wasn't the family console.
It was Xbox before Xbox was Xbox.
Yeah.
That's quite interesting, because, I'm assuming that Matt would have the same experience, but, over here, that never really happened. It was just kind of like Sega ruled the roost. Even as far back as the Master System just kind of settled over here and people got to grips with it. And Nintendo were just kind of like that other console.
The Nintendo didn't really gain that much of a foothold. I mean, you occasionally saw them around, but I know, like, with all of my friends, 90% of them had Mega Drives, and the one person I knew who had a Super Nintendo also had a Mega Drive. So, you know, it really wasn't all that popular, but they were around.
They were around, and they were still relatively popular. It just wasn't anywhere near as popular as Sega's devices.
Well, that has a lot to do with how Europe and Japan didn't suffer from the video game crash in the 70s and into the 80s.
Yes.
That's the thing, because like you had the video game crash, and then Nintendo came around as this kind of savior. Really, it's just like, remember all that shit? Remember E.T. and all that crap, all that shovelware that you got? Well, we're here with a proper home console, and we've got quality titles. We've got the seal of quality and all that shit. And obviously, it was like a breath of fresh air for America.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the thing. It's like it's not even a breath of fresh air. They nailed it so hard in their marketing with the NES because they actually pitched it as a toy and put it on the toy aisle.
Yeah, that was nobody. The thing. They snuck it in because nobody wanted to buy a video game console.
Yeah, nobody wanted to buy it. That's why it came with a ROB unit. That's why the NES came with a ROB unit, so it was more like a toy. Nintendo had absolutely no investment in the ROB unit.
But I don't even really understand how Sega came to be popular over in Europe because, I was quite young at the time. Maybe Matt would have more insight into this. But obviously we had all our different consoles around here and we didn't suffer the crash. Things just continued and things were just as popular as they ever were. And then, as far as I'm aware, it just kind of transitioned from those old Atari, Commodore, things like that. It just kind of transitioned from those into Master System and NES. I'm not sure how Sega got that foothold.
From what I understand, the NES launched, and it became like super popular in the US. But for whatever reason, they had a lot of trouble in the EU market. It just didn't really catch on. So Sega then saw an opportunity and exclusively, well, not exclusively, they just focused more on the European market as opposed to the US market and like put all their resources into that because they saw that they really could get a corner on this market if they tried hard enough because Nintendo wasn't really doing that well over here.
And that makes sense because, Sega were always really big on their marketing back in that era. Like, I remember all the Game Gear, Master System, and Mega Drive marketing at the time. But, like, Nintendo, I didn't really remember seeing anything. And, like, even when I switched over to Nintendo, heaven forbid, in the N64 era, like, I always remember thinking at the time that Nintendo of Europe was just kind of crap and never really did anything. Yeah. It's like they just ignored Europe. Like, even with the GameCube era, I remember seeing those cool adverts where things were like in cubes and stuff. And that's pretty much all I could think of that Nintendo of Europe ever did. Like, they were pretty slack. And it probably was just a marketing thing over here.
Early on, it was like Matt said, where the NES just didn't take off in Europe the same way it did here. As time went on, it was more because Sega had already locked down Europe and Nintendo just wrote it off and was like, we'll just focus on North America and Japan. But then there's some games that y'all got and we didn't until we bugged them enough. So I don't know. What I will say is I was born in 90, so after a lot of this happened, but I don't remember the Master System at all. Like the first Sega device I knew of was the Genesis.
Like I'm the same really with the NES. I mean, I was aware of the SNES's existence because when I really got into consoles, it was when I got my Mega Drive. Although admittedly, I actually played the Master System quite a fair bit more, weirdly enough. And the NES, I didn't really know existed until later, and I was like, yeah, that's vaguely familiar. But I was just kind of more aware of, SNES from Nintendo's side.
Right.
And I was thinking about this too, because like I said, we had the video game crash and Europe didn't have a video game crash. And on top of that, you had a plethora of consoles over there, consoles and computers. Yeah. You had your Sega consoles. You had your
ZX Spectrum.
Yeah, you had the Spectrum, you had the Commodore, you had all these different consoles that were floating around in computers, whereas Nintendo looked at the US markets and went, "Holy cow, we can
Video games,
steal that. We can steal this thing," and they did. They were trying to bring in a brand new console into a oversaturated market.
The Commodore 64 was actually really popular in the US.
It was, but it was the only one.
Yeah, it was the only one, and that's because it was sold off as a computer and not a video game system.
Yeah.
We still had a lot of people over here with the Commodore 64, but the Spectrum kind of had this market down.
And so, yeah, that might be another reason that they kind of avoided Europe.
Yeah, they've already got their own consoles. They're not interested in this.
Yeah.
Europe had a ton of stuff, and it didn't have as much population as the US.
Regardless of everything that happened around it, the SNES really changed. Like the Genesis and SNES changed gaming. They were able to do things that they hadn't even thought of by the end of those life cycles.
Oh, yeah. Crazy stuff. Like X-Play, might have been Crossplay. Or no, not Crossplay, X-Band. When I think it was pronounced Crossband, but I could be wrong because I never had one.
Maybe.
And that was literally online gaming.
Yeah, because somebody once made a point. It's like, it's a console with online play, wireless controllers, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, sounds like a modern game console. Nope, it's the Sega Genesis.
Yeah. Near the end of their life cycle, they pushed some insane stuff. Some stuff that wasn't even explored for a couple more generations.
Yeah, I mean, and, as we'll get into, there was some stuff on the SNES that looked just as good, if not better, than some stuff on the N64.
Well, that might be a bit of a stretch, but they definitely pulled some insane strings for 1990.
Yeah, I mean, like, famously, one of their games, which, we're going to look at later, when Miyamoto, how do you pronounce it? Miyamoto. For some reason, I forgot the pronunciation of his name. For some reason, when Miyamoto looked at it, it was like, oh, and this is what the N64 can do. And they were like, nope, this is on the SNES. And he was like, oh, shit, son. Those are actual words, I believe.
Rough translation.
Yeah, exactly. I won't go into spoilers, although that quote will probably reveal what it is.
Yeah.
There we go. So, yeah, it did have some pretty amazingly good stuff on it. The things that looked beautiful, especially towards the later end of the life cycle.
Well, and one of the things that was super important was the Mode 7, I believe it's fair to call it a graphics chip.
Yeah.
And it allowed to simulate, I guess you could say you could simulate a pseudo 3D environment using a race scanning, scan line. I don't know. It's something like that. I don't know the technical jargon. I never bothered. But it allowed for really smooth transitioning.
Yeah.
The technical phrase is the rotatey chip.
Yeah, the rotatey. There you go.
It does all the rotatey stuff.
It did the rotatey stuff that was famously used in F-Zero. So instead of doing like other racing games around the time and before, just did kind of like, it looks like you're doing turns, but you're really not.
Right.
Yeah, it would spin the whole map under you, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, like Super Ghouls and Ghosts is just this one level where you just step on something, it rotates the entire screen 90 degrees. Mm-hmm. And it's so obviously just a gimmick using the rotated chip.
Right.
But,
it did allow for some really good stuff.
Like gimmicky, but other stuff like, I suppose like Star Fox is probably the big one, or Star Wing over in Europe. Because that used a chip to simulate like a sort of a 3D environment.
Mm-hmm. Pilot Wings used Mode 7 hardcore, and Pilot Wings was actually a essentially glorified demo is all it was. They ended up packing it into a cartridge and actually selling it.
Yeah, and that was the whole point, was to show off the Mode 7.
That's all it was for, was to show off Mode 7 like in all its glory.
The one really good use of it that I remember as a kid was Final Fantasy VI, when you were there's one segment where you're underwater, and then whenever you're flying around in the airship, it's all Mode 7, and it looks really good. The other big one was the one that came later in its life cycle with the Super FX chip, which was it was kind of nuts the way they did that.
Yeah, I'm not going to say games like Star Fox look good, But then when you go, this is a Super Nintendo, and you're playing this smoothly on a Super Nintendo with these polygons, and you go like, oh, we're running 3D on a 16-bit console.
Yeah.
And it's not painful to look at 3D.
Yes.
That's the important part, is it doesn't hurt to play Star Fox. It's a crude 3D game,
Unlike
all
certain
things considered.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
but it doesn't make your eyes bleed.
Yeah.
Did you ever play Duke Nukem 3D on the Mega Drive?
No.
No, that sounds painful.
I mean, it's impressive what they did, but it runs at like 2 frames a second.
Ouch.
I mean, it makes Saturn Doom look like it's running, 60 frames per second.
Double ouch.
See, you don't have that problem with Nintendo because if I remember correctly, they didn't let things onto the system if they couldn't run at a certain quality.
Well, that was with the NES and Nintendo seal of quality, and then there's the whole Atari versus Nintendo, and Nintendo basically just bent him over and kicked him out the door.
Yeah, well.
That was a whole different thing. But yeah, no, Nintendo, to have a Nintendo seal of quality, Nintendo approved game, they had to meet certain standards. And after the video game crash of the big video game crash, getting games onto these consoles, you didn't often see games that were just utter trash, because, especially on Nintendo consoles, I mean, they existed, but they weren't like super prevalent.
Right.
Because they went, we don't want to do that again.
Yeah.
That didn't happen until the Wii era, when they just allowed any kind of shit to go through.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's, the Wii was the return of shovelware, so.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's get into it. We've got 4 games, and these are not the objectively best games on the system. These are not my favorite games on the system. These are 4 games that I feel represent what the SNES was and what it could do.
Yeah.
Right. And we've already talked about some of the other great games in the past, like A Link to the Past and whatnot. We've covered those games already.
Yeah.
So
let's dig in with the first game. All right, I'm sure a lot of you knew it was coming, so let's get the Square RPG out of the way first. The first game we're covering is Secret of Mana, the second game in the Mana series, although most people didn't play Final Fantasy Adventure when it came out, and we've already talked about that somewhat in depth. But Secret of Mana was a big step up from Final Fantasy Adventure. You had 3 playable characters, you could play co-op with up to 2 other people, and I think I don't think the multi-tap was made for this game, but it was compatible with it.
Yeah, it was compatible. Multi-tap was made for other stuff like NBA or like Jam, had like Jam in mind.
Yeah, the Bomberman games was
yeah, Bomberman.
Yeah, I think that's what it was made for, but it was compatible with Secret of Mana. I will say that, as much as I love this game, I will acknowledge it is better played with other people. Like, I had a lot more fun playing this with one of my best friends than I did playing this by myself.
Or to make it even more entertaining is you could just let 2 other friends play it instead of you. Maybe that's just me.
Now that was way meaner than I was ever intending on getting.
Sorry, I had to make that little dig.
But anyway, the gist of Secret of Mana is, instead of the turn-based RPG style of Final Fantasy, it's real-time combat, but it does it in such a way that, you're not just mashing the button, you press the button and then a bar refills, and once it's back to 100%, your attacks will be full strength, but if you hit it before that, they'll be lower strength. And then if you hold the button down to let the bar charge, you'll get a stronger attack. And your weapons level up, and the more they level up, the more you can charge it for even bigger attacks. It was a different kind of combat system.
You say that it's not turn-based, but in parts it did sort of feel turn-based. Like, for example, I found that when there were a group of enemies, they can sort of stun lock you. And it's not like you've got room to escape. It seems like they're queuing up attacks because they don't all attack at the same time. It's like one attacks, and then the other attack comes, and then the other attack comes. So it does seem like there's a sort of rudimentary turn-based system, especially because you have to go through like a weapon wheel and, choose your attacks that way. It sort of feels like not turn-based, but then not real-time. It's sort of like pseudo real-time in a way. I don't know if you guys kind of got that.
I don't know. It felt real time to me. I mean,
I'd say it's only in moments that it feels like that. I say when you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're spamming attacks, it kind of has that kind of feeling.
Well, it's because of the game tries to encourage pacing, and I don't think it did it that well. But I appreciate because honestly, if you think about it, that's a stamina bar.
Yeah, and
that is straight up a stamina bar.
When you can get it to lock in right, and you can get your mind in the right set, like you end up feeling the ebb and flow of battle. It's just not easy to get into that headspace.
One reason for that might be that sometimes, especially with flying enemies, it can be difficult to land your attack.
Right, it can be difficult to gauge where they are.
Yeah, exactly. You're sometimes a little bit out of their hitbox, even though you think you're dead on. And that, for me, was like one of the flaws in the combat system.
That is valid. Like, that's totally a valid thing. That's something that, when I played this with my friend, we were sitting there struggling with. It's like, we're right there. We should be hitting it, but we're not. But yeah, I mean,
issues with the combat, but we'll go into that later.
Well, and the big thing is, you look at the examples I use are this, Chrono Trigger, and Final Fantasy VI. Final Fantasy VI is on the far end where it's you stand on one side of the screen, the enemy's on the other side, and you menu navigate to fight. Chrono Trigger is a hybrid where your attacks, like you're in a real time kind of space, like you still have to hit with your actual attacks, but your character will move based on the attack they're using, and you're still choosing attacks like in a turn-based system, but it's not standing on opposite sides of the screen. And then Secret of Mana is real time, with some caveats.
To be completely honest, not to sound mean, I kind of wish you had picked Chrono Trigger.
Well, I had Chrono Trigger down for a different one because it fit that one better than Secret of Mana does.
Okay.
But the interesting thing about the difference in combat styles between Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, and Secret of Mana is they are all made by the same company in roughly the same time frame.
Yes, they're all made by Square, all on the SNES, and all relatively close together.
So it's good to see kind of like a company experimenting with different play styles, and you can kind of pick and choose which one you prefer. I mean, in that kind of game, I personally prefer the turn-based combat.
Right.
And I think Secret of Mana would have been better with turn-based combat. The combat is okay. I mean, it's not terrible or anything like that.
It's okay.
It's just a bit iffy.
Yeah, it's like, I feel like it should have been either turn-based or they should have implemented it better, because it feels like you're having to navigate loads of menus to choose attacks. And I don't remember ever using them anyway. Like, I don't think the shoulder buttons do anything. And they could have used the shoulder buttons for navigating attacks, because it feels like I'm constantly dipping into menus and choosing different things, especially when it comes to items. Like when you pick up items and you have to use it, which, I'll get on later when we talk about those. But it just felt like the whole thing was a pain in the ass, and it felt like it was bogging down the pacing.
So are you actually switching weapons in combat then?
No, I mean, like, not for that. I mean, for example, if you're using magic attacks and you have to switch magic.
Yeah.
Then you have to kind of choose different ones. Obviously, when you're just doing basic attacks, then it's just, whacking them. But when you're using magic attacks or selecting items for, like, overall navigation, it just seems like I'm stopping, going through a menu and doing stuff like that all the time. Well, not all the time. I say for like basic combat, it's fine. But for like other stuff, it just feels like it bogs down the pacing. And I think at least in terms of for attacks, it should have been maybe turn-based, and then you just choose it through a menu, since that's basically what you're doing anyway, and it would have been a bit smoother. And then the item should have been the shoulder buttons, maybe.
That basically would have been Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
Like, what you're describing is Chrono Trigger.
I've not played Chrono Trigger, so...
So yeah, basically what Adam's saying here is you should have picked Chrono Trigger.
Yeah.
Well, it was going to be this or Chrono Trigger, because I wasn't going to put Final Fantasy VI here, so it was going to be this or Chrono Trigger.
But as I was saying before, there is, with those 3 different games, there is kind of like something for everyone.
Yeah.
I think I don't think the system is necessarily bad. It's just, it doesn't feel like it's smooth enough and nuanced enough. And if what I'm describing is basically Chrono Trigger, it seems like Chrono Trigger did what it should have done.
Well, I think Chrono Trigger came out after this, too.
The beef I have with Secret of Mana, personally, is that before I ever played Secret of Mana, I had played A Link to the Past. And I was getting a Link to the Past vibe, like kind of visually and just how the world was set up. And it wasn't Link to the Past, and it was clunky.
No, it wasn't near as tight as Link to the Past.
And I feel like they should have either made it much tighter and faster feeling, like Link to the Past, or they should have, like Adam was described, they should have basically just gone the Chrono Trigger route with it.
I completely agree. It did seem to like channel A Link to the Past quite a lot, but the level design wasn't anywhere near as good, nor like the enemy design or the boss design. Because like the level design, for example, you get the whip, and the whip thing starts really good because you get it, and then as soon as you get it, you've got a shortcut, because you use the whip to fling across the other side, and you'd have to do a load of backtracking, which is great. And then there's like loads of other instances where it just seems like they've created gaps in the level just to use the whip.
Use the whip.
Because you have to switch through the menus and stuff. It just kind of feels more like a chore rather than like a puzzle or anything like you'd get in, for example, a Zelda game, like, for example, with the Minish Cap and the Suki thing.
I will admit, when I played this with my friend, we had one character that used the whip by default. So 9 times out of 10, we already had the whip out. So we actually didn't notice that the first time through.
And I think,
I already get the whip.
And that's the thing, is I think that's what they were intending.
Having more than one person, yeah.
Having more than one person. It was built with more than one person in mind. And I like the idea. I like the idea of a multiplayer RPG, a cooperative multiplayer RPG. It's a fantastic concept.
Yeah.
And I think it was better realized in the sequel, which I don't know if we're going to cover. But the sequel, which was never released outside of Japan, did away with the charging bar, and you had different characters to choose from, and they improved on this formula. It just didn't get out of Japan.
What was the title of that?
It was called Seiken Densetsu 3.
I've heard of that.
It's the secret year of Mana.
Yeah. Like when people make ROM cartridges here, they title it Secret of Mana 2.
Okay.
Because it didn't have an American name. It was just Seiken Densetsu 3, just like this one was Seiken Densetsu 2. So I've done a little bit of looking up, and the battle system actually has mechanics that were first considered for Final Fantasy IV when they thought about changing that up. And features that were dropped from this were used for Chrono Trigger.
Ah, see, it's all coming around.
Yeah.
So that's what it is the ideas that Adam wanted, they dropped and put in Chrono Trigger.
Yeah. But I think Ryan best knocks the nail on the head with it. I think the problem is that instead of being like an RPG, it seems to be channeling that adventure vibe of A Link to the Past. But because it doesn't have like the design of it, it just kind of feels like a really shitty clone of it. And doesn't seem anywhere near as fun. I mean, shit is harsh. It's not shit. It's just, it feels a bit kind of like a poor man's Link to the Past.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, Square's developers are good, but this was one of their first attempts at making that kind of world. They were not going to build a game as tight as Link to the Past.
Yeah.
But I think their vision was slightly differentiated from it, but definitely channeling it. But the one thing this game does have that easily equals Link to the Past, and I would argue almost any game on the system, is the music.
Oh,
The
yeah.
music
Yeah.
in this game is some of the best I have ever heard.
It's absolutely stellar. It is beyond good.
Yeah, I'll give it that.
Honestly, though, I mean, look at Square's entire catalogue, and music has always been top notch. I mean, right up to kind of like the latest Final Fantasy games and stuff like that. The music is just fantastic.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's kind of. I mean, honestly, it's like going after Capcom. We're like, wow, this Capcom game has good music during the NES and Super NES days.
Yeah.
No,
Of course, it's going to have good music. It's a Capcom game. You can pick even the shittiest Capcom game, and it has good music.
Even back to like Final Fantasy 1, which opens with Prelude, and that is like such an iconic track that they've used in like pretty much every single Final Fantasy game since. They really do know what they're doing when it comes to music.
Yeah, they know how to make good music, and they know how to use that music well.
Mm-hmm. And it was definitely a saving grace for this game because, honestly, a lot of people gush over Secret of Mana, and I mean, maybe I'll get death threats in the mail over this, but I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, it's not a bad game. I think if you're gagging for that kind of RPG adventure type game, then it's not a bad thing as, you know, something to satiate your appetite, but nor is it particularly great. I think it's one of those games that if you got it, it would be a nice way to bide your time until the next big thing comes out.
Well, and I think part of the thing coming into play is that this was 1993.
Yeah,
So it was about the middle of the SNES lifespan, but it was different from other stuff that had come before. Like after this, we got things like Chrono Trigger and, you know, some of the other stuff that could one up this. But up to this point, we hadn't seen a game like this, so everyone was like, "Oh my god, it's amazing!" And I think that's where a lot of that comes from, is that we've gotten better. We've gotten this kind of thing done better since, but everyone still remembers that initial reaction.
Yeah, I think nostalgia might play a little bit of a factor in.
The nostalgia goggles are pretty heavy.
Oh, definitely.
I'll say, like, I'm not saying it's a bad game or anything. I just don't think the level design is all that. And I think there are some iffy design choices. And can we talk about the bosses? I only beat the first boss, which was
The first real boss, or
I don't know, like I think it was like a grasshopper type thing.
Oh yeah, the big bug.
Yeah, I mean, you can just kind of fuck over those guys with like magic and stuff, and just spam attacks.
Well, I don't think you have magic for that first boss, do you?
Well, not for that first boss, but I mean the bosses in general.
Oh yeah.
Like that one you can do it, but for the other ones, like what was the first boss you face after you get the magic?
Is it the one in the dwarf village? It's
I
not
remember
completely linear, so we might be talking about different bosses.
Right.
But I remember just kind of spamming attacks because, like, the magic just seems to be quite OP in this game,
Yeah.
and it feels like there's no other reason to use any other attacks, and it makes the boss fights a little bit simple and a little bit easy. I don't know if they get harder later on, but it just kind of felt like
So they do
both
they do get more challenging. It also depends on your gameplay style, because some bosses are easier to beat with certain things than others. I mean, like how, you know, there's one boss that is literally a wall with a face on it. So, you know, there's a lot of different bosses, and I mean, just looking at the, you know, the sprite examples, I have seen almost all of these bosses. Actually, I think I have seen all of them. But the further in you get, you start seeing more of the variety. There's even a boss that's a throwback to Final Fantasy Adventure, the big tiger thing.
Yeah, that is where I hit a brick wall. That tiger just massacred my party over and over and over.
That fight is like when you watch that fight, it's just like the opening of Final Fantasy Adventure, where, you know, the gate opens and the tiger comes out and, you know, wrecks your face. Yeah, so I mean, the bosses are better than I think any of us got to on this particular run. I know because I've been through the game. But yeah, so the bosses do get better. than the
Alright.
initial game.
Because as I was saying, like with the level design, it felt like the bosses sort of paled in comparison to the likes of Link to the Past as well.
Right.
And obviously, Link to the Past, you've got these interesting bosses that are designed around gimmicks, and they're sort of like a puzzle to fight as well. Like, how do you
Yes.
actually beat it? Whereas these, it's just kind of like, here's a thing, kill the thing. It's slightly harder than a normal enemy.
Right. That kind of does stay, although there are some changes to that. But, I mean, first of all, there's a hell of a lot more bosses in this than in Zelda. But, yeah, it's just that as time goes on, you do get the exciting bosses and the fun ones. You just got to get there. And, a month is not enough time to play this game. It's just not.
Yeah.
But whilst the sequel, which was then released in Japan, probably had refinements over the first, I know that Sword of Mana, which was another sequel, which we did get, refined it like quite a bit, and it's a similar kind of combat style, but I actually ended up preferring Sword of Mana over Secret of Mana because it has those refinements. It's a similar kind of gameplay, but it has those things that kind of like, it's just quality of life stuff that it gives you that just makes it more playable overall.
Right. Well, and that's why Sword of Mana even exists, is to bring Final Fantasy Adventure into, modern, well, at the time, modern, convenience, and also to improve a lot of the stuff. It's just that they went a little overboard adding the story and everything.
Oh yeah, I mean the dialogue in it was a pain in the arse, but the gameplay was good. I would go back to Sword of Mana. I probably wouldn't go back to Secret of Mana.
I would say try Secret of Mana with a friend if you can. And I do think that some of it is when you're playing with a friend, you don't notice some of these things as much as when you're playing by yourself using your critic brain.
Yeah. Thinking about that's probably one of the things the game would have been a lot less painful if you could basically go like, okay, well, you're going to have this loadout and I'm going to have this loadout so we can continue smoothly.
Yeah, if you see someone getting stun locked, you can run over there and help them, whereas the AI might help you. The customizable AI was good. Like, I really did appreciate that when I first played this game. And obviously it's been put into every release after this, but it's not perfect.
Well, no, but speaking of customizable, the customizable everything in the game was really good.
Yeah,
you can for some reason really, really customize your menus. There's tons of options. Like, I found that and I'm like, wait, why is this even here?
Because Square was showing off. I mean, most of the time when Square does something that isn't Final Fantasy, they're either experimenting or showing off.
Valid point.
At least in the SNES era.
It's true.
And then when they do Final Fantasy, they also show off.
Basically, Square just shows off. That's all I'm getting out of this.
Yeah, basically. I mean, you know what? I think with some of these games, they earned it.
Yeah, because Final Fantasy VI is quite fantastic.
Oh yeah, it is one of my favorite games ever.
So, anyhow.
Anything else anyone wants to add? I mean, I think we pretty well covered a lot of it. The story we didn't really talk about, but I mean, I'm the only one that's seen the entire story.
The depth of the story, and also, I mean, 20-something years later, but spoilers.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Final Fantasy Adventure / Sword of Mana takes place after this game. Technically, it's a prequel, but like it doesn't really matter. Like you can play them independently, and it like you won't be lost because they don't affect each other at all.
Right.
The story is fine. It's pretty standard fantasy RPG kind of thing.
Yep, I kind of didn't really pay any attention to it. That's why I didn't comment on the story, because I started paying attention. I was like, oh, it's the same old RPG shite.
Yeah.
And then
It's
I
the
just
same
stopped
stuff.
paying attention to it.
It even down to the point of the princess doesn't want to be the princess, wants to fight and be self-sufficient, yada yada, which, at this point is an overplayed trope, despite the fact that it wasn't at the time.
We've seen this one before. You're not clever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's All I can really say about Secret of Mana's story is that, boy, it sure is a story.
Yeah.
That's about all I got.
Well, I mean, it was less obnoxious than Sword of Mana, so I'll give it that. It gets praised for that at least.
That's because Sword of Mana got pretentious and wanted to add more story to what didn't really need more story. I mean, that's the thing. When you're playing a Mana game, you're there for the gameplay to an extent and the music. The story is not what you're there for.
Yeah.
And if you are, you'll be disappointed.
I'm sure someone will fight you on that, though.
Oh, yeah. I mean, somebody's going to be upset with me, but, like, I'm looking at the plot, and it's the same stuff we've seen a dozen times. I love this game. This is, a game I really enjoy, but I acknowledge it's not as good as some of these other ones.
And again, for some reason, like I said, maybe someone will fight me on this one, but it is sort of a game of legend on the SNES. I mean, the game will run you a solid $80 loose.
Yeah, I paid $60 for my cartridge, unboxed and everything.
Yeah. Inbox will start running into triple digits real fast.
But it is worth mentioning as well, if someone wants to pick this up, it is on the SNES Mini as well.
It is.
Well, hang on. It may not be in their region.
Oh, is it not in all regions?
I know the games are different in each region, because I know Final Fantasy VI is only in one region, and I think Secret of Mana is one that was region locked as well. Let me see.
Interesting. I did not know this.
Earthbound is only in North America. Fire Emblem...
Earthbound is actually on the European one.
Is it?
It is.
Huh. Either they changed that or this article is very wrong. I know. I don't remember if this is one of the region exclusive ones. I know Final Fantasy VI was only in one of the regions. My biggest beef with getting a hold of this game is that they have not put this on any virtual console. They didn't put this on 3DS. They didn't put it on the Wii U. Like, you can't get a digital copy of this unless you live in Japan.
Or you could also pick up the remake as well. It was remade a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I heard it was shit.
Yeah, the remake does not live up to the original game. Okay, so if you can read
maybe
Japanese...
it was remade, and then when people played again, they realised maybe Secret Mana isn't all that, and then they just blamed on the remake.
I don't know. No, well, the remake legitimately has some issues that this one didn't have. All three games in the Mana series were released on the Japanese eShop for the Switch, but only there. Like, they didn't even give us the two that were released in America, which still upsets me. Because this would be great on Switch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's weird because they definitely have the ROMs.
As much as I am not a huge fan of the game, I really think that the Switch online, whenever they get to the point where they put SNES games on there, I think this should be one of them.
Yeah.
Maybe if just so people can go, oh, I don't understand why this game is $80 if I buy a cartridge.
Yeah. I mean, I also think the sequel should be on there, but they won't let me buy the sequel. They keep throwing money at them and nothing happens.
I keep faxing them money. They don't take it.
I think we've basically covered this.
I don't think there's a whole lot more to say here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good game. It's a little pricey. Like you're going to be paying to get an actual cartridge version of this. I would say try to track down an SNES Mini, which is surprisingly realistic at this point.
You can get an SNES Mini for $80, or you can pick up Secret of Mana for $80.
Yeah, starting at $42 on US Amazon. That's kind of crazy for this one, actually.
Well, also, I would be hesitant that it's not a repro.
Well, let's see. This one's coming from Japan, so that's one explanation. Let's see. This one, the actual cartridge has some scuffs and whatnot. Yeah, I mean, once you get to the point where they guarantee it's an authentic cartridge, you're looking at least $45, $50.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean...
And that's down. It was quite expensive several years ago.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I paid $60 for mine. So, yeah, and I mean, it's not as expensive as some of them out there. I think Chrono Trigger still runs about $150.
Well, yeah, and games like Super Metroid also will set you back $60, $70, $80 too if they're in decent condition. That's loose.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's one of the most expensive games. It was like a $200 game for a while if you wanted to get it complete.
Yeah.
But, that's whatever.
All right, so we'll take a quick break for a musical interlude and then go on to our next game. The next game, basically it was the final nail in the coffin for the Genesis. The Donkey Kong Country series. This one we're specifically talking about Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest. This is when Nintendo just started throwing their weight around. Because, like Adam mentioned earlier, Donkey Kong Country was made and, Miyamoto was like, oh, this is what the new systems are going to do. And they're like, no, this is the old system.
Yeah.
And Donkey Kong Country changed everything. Like, Donkey Kong Country was released in, 94-ish? Let me see. Yeah, 94.
What's interesting is that not only was it, fantastic looking, but it was made by an English developer.
Yes.
And back then, they didn't think anyone in the West would be able to make good games. They only trusted Japanese developers. So that in itself was quite a landmark moment.
Well, and here's the crazy thing about it. Donkey Kong Country was released in 1994. The N64 marketing, I think, started up around 96. And in all of the time between Donkey Kong Country releasing and the N64 starting to ramp up, Donkey Kong was the face of Nintendo. Mario took a back seat for a few years. And, you would go to the official Nintendo homepage and you'd see Donkey Kong everywhere. Donkey Kong took everything by storm. And it was crazy to see that, and then you play the game and you see why, because they were really good. I specifically picked Donkey Kong Country 2 because I feel like it improved on what was good about the first game. It added things that I really enjoyed. I feel like it started to decline around DKC 3. I feel like Donkey Kong Country 2 is, the best of the bunch. So that's why I picked that one as opposed to the original.
Ooh, I will severely disagree with you there. I was playing Donkey Kong Country 2. All I really wanted to do was play the first one.
Yeah, I'm kind of of the same opinion. I felt that the level design was a lot better in 1, and it just seemed to play a little bit better for me.
I'm not going to say that DKC 2 is bad, but it was one of those weird things where it's like, man, I wish I was playing DKC 1 right now.
Here's a thought I'll submit. When you're playing the original Donkey Kong Country, your levels are all straight left to right. It's all horizontal. Donkey Kong Country 2 has a lot of vertical levels.
It does. You only had a couple of those in the first DKC. One of them was in an ice cavern. There was a lot of going up and kind of backtracking a little bit.
Yeah.
And then the other one, there was 2 of them on the ship, Gangplank Galleon.
Yeah, they were very much one-off.
Yeah.
Whereas here, the second level is a straight-up vertical level. I feel like they took what they learned from the original Donkey Kong Country and improved on it. Like, for example, when you play Donkey Kong Country, who do you use?
No, Donkey Kong.
DK.
See, most people I talk to only use Diddy because he's faster and in most instances, he's the better character to use.
Yeah, but only DK can kill Crusher, so...
Yeah, but, I mean... Most people I talk to, they're like, "Oh, I never use DK unless I have to." Whereas in this one, the two characters are similar, but they're different enough that you need to use both. And
this is true.
Yeah, they do a better job of encouraging you to use both characters and make both characters feel more enjoyable.
Yeah,
this is true. Dixie does feel super unique in the way because she can do her little flip flies and yeah.
You see, I've never played the first Donkey Kong Country game. The only 2 I've played are, this one for the podcast, and I played Tropical Freeze on the Wii U. Oh, and I played a bit of Donkey Kong Country Returns. Was that the other one by Retro?
Yeah, that was the one.
Yeah.
But I never owned that, so I played it at my friend's house on the Wii.
Right.
And yes, I've only had limited experience with that one. So I can't really judge it based on the first game because I've never played the first game. But this one it was a game. And yeah, I mean, it's not a bad game. Like, I don't think the retro Donkey Kong Country games are bad games either. Like, I find enjoyment from them, but I don't find a massive amount of enjoyment. It's not like some other games, like, for example, Sonic or Mega Man, where I have a lot of fun playing it. It kind of feels like it's enjoyable enough for me to keep on playing, and that's about it. I don't know if anyone else feels the same. I don't know whether it's this game or whether it's the series in general.
I think in your case,
the gameplay style, I just find it serviceable. Sort of like Alex Kidd in a way, where it's not necessarily a bad game. It just never gets fantastic. It's just good enough to play. It scratches that platforming itch, and that's about as far as it gets with me.
I think in your case, it's probably the series as a whole. I think this one's just not going to click as well for you. And I think some of that is like, you're a big fan of the original Mega Man, where it's all, it's basically a one-screen puzzle. Whereas, this is the more fluid thing that I enjoy.
Well, yeah, and I was actually going to... One thing I did want to say, especially since you brought up Sega, and, this is all about basically beating Sega. My friend pointed out to me years ago that Donkey Kong Country, and he was referring specifically to the first one, it changed up a little bit for the second one. Obviously, the more like vertical levels and whatnot. But a lot of your standard left to right platforming levels almost feel like low-key rhythm games because everything is basically spread out and timed in such a way that you can really haul ass through some of those stages.
Yes.
You can really just, if you know the stage, you can just go.
Yeah, I
and
mean, I appreciate that. Like Sonic games like that in a way.
The weird thing about the Sonic games is it's like all right, go fast, go, stop, jump around.
Not necessarily.
Right. Start running, go fast, go fast, go fast. And then there's the things where you can like launch yourself, like the clip that you shared, where you basically just fly into the Murano sphere and land at the end of the stage.
In a way, but I kind of disagree with Sonic games because in terms of the older ones anyway, with like a lot of them, once you know the stage and where stuff is, you can go through them pretty fluidly. I mean, with Sonic 1, some of them were a lot of stop and start. But, Sonic 2 and Sonic 3, those ones, if you know the level, you can pretty much go through it in one fluid motion. I suppose kind of like Mega Man, you can do that as well in a way. And I appreciate where you can do one solid run and you're not just waiting for stuff. So I do appreciate that about the Donkey Kong series. But I don't know, I don't know whether it's the movement mechanics or the actual design of the levels. But I don't know, it just doesn't click with me as being, this is an amazing series. Like, there's a lot about it I love. Like, the art style, I think, is beautiful. I think it looks fantastic. The music is, phenomenal. And, like, some of the extra bits, like the bits with the animals, like, one thing I appreciated in this was the emphasis on the animals. Mm-hmm. You get a bit of it in the modern Donkey Kong Country games, but, less so, and they don't seem as good. Like, in this, the animal sections, they seem pretty fun, because, like, there's one where you're a swordfish, which is quite cool, and there's another on a rhino.
Robbie the rhino, yeah.
And they're really fun, and I appreciate those parts. But then the standard platforming, the just moving about and jumping and dealing with the crocodile dudes, I don't find as appealing. And as I said, I'm not quite sure what it is. I don't know whether it's just the central mechanics just don't gel with me or what. But I can tell it's a good game and I can see what people like, but I don't love it. I think it's fine. I don't think it's bad. And I don't hate it. I couldn't criticize it. But for some reason, it just does, like all of the ones that I've played, just don't seem to click properly with me. And I can't even put my finger on it.
Well, I am not like the biggest fan of platformers in general. But this is kind of a game, well, the first Donkey Kong Country is a game that had a lot of nostalgia for me because I had a SNES when that game came out. And I went around a friend's house, he picked up the game, I saw it looked absolutely beautiful, played a bit of it, and like the next week I got that game myself. and I played a hell of a lot of it, and I just really, really loved everything about it. It was a very different kind of game to a lot of the other platformers on a lot of the other systems, stuff like Sonic and stuff like that, and Mario. Just like the flow of the levels, I mean, as you've mentioned, there is kind of like a rhythm action feel to it. You can just go around the level like bouncing on different stuff, and it just feels smooth to me. That's probably down to the fact that the levels are quite linear, and that is probably also why I didn't get along with the second game as much, because it doesn't have that linearity in the levels.
Like, the thing that made it a little bit different is actually the thing that hurt it just a little bit.
From what I understand, when Rare was making this game, they could have easily just done another Donkey Kong Country and made gangbusters, but they wanted to go the extra mile. They wanted to find ways to make it stand out from its predecessor. It's just, looking back at it from here, it's hard to look at it, side by side with its predecessor, because its predecessor is just that big of a game. Like, Donkey Kong Country is one of the titans of the SNES, and that's why one of them is in this list, is because Donkey Kong Country is one of the most important games ever released on the system.
I think in terms of the SNES, the original was probably more iconic than an Ubisoft hat. So, it's one of those big titles, and probably if you're going to compare that one with this one's maybe going to suffer in comparison just because it's got a lot to live up to. I mean, I can't really compare it because I've not played it, but I can appreciate how it would have difficulty.
Like, I personally like this one better. There's things about this that I specifically really like the spider is my favorite of the animals. I really like playing as Dixie. Like, I really like things that are in this game and not the first game. So I think that's one of the reasons I tend to like this one more.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
And we're talking about two very good games that, one is slightly, better or more renowned than the other. Like, they're still both really good.
Yeah, right.
Another interesting fact as well, I actually played this on the Japanese cartridge. That's just the one that I picked up. And it isn't called Donkey Kong Country 2 over there. It's actually Super Donkey Kong 2, which I just found interesting. I mean, it's still the same game, apart from the fact that I can't read any of the text.
Right.
But, they call it Super Donkey Kong 2 for some reason.
Huh.
Well, another fun thing is slightly unrelated, and it says this is more about the series and less about the game. But in Donkey Kong, your progress is shown as a percentage.
Yes.
And in Donkey Kong Country, you could get 101%. In Donkey Kong Country 2, you can get 102%.
Yes.
And I want to say in Donkey Kong Country 3, and maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, you can get 103%.
And I believe when H-Bomber Guy did his stream a few months back of Donkey Kong 64...
101%, I think.
Was it 101?
I'm pretty sure it's 101%.
It's 101%, except I believe now because of it was like 2 or 3 years ago. There's now a 102%.
101's the legit max.
There's actually a more legit max because you could get 101%, but they actually found a rainbow banana coin hidden in plain sight under some grass.
All right, so it's a legit.
It's a legit coin. I think it bumped it up to 102, and it really, really upset the speedrun community because all of these 101% runs were sudden, or these basically game complete runs were suddenly now just 101% runs because of one thing that nobody saw until somebody essentially went in with a world editor and went, "Hey, how did we miss that?"
DKC3 is 103%. Apparently, there's a code to remove barrels that's considered hard mode that makes it 105%.
I did not know that.
This is a speedrunning site, so that might be a specific speedrunning thing. I don't know.
Overall, I think this series is absolutely fantastic.
I mean,
and that's including TKC3, which is sort of the black sheep of the trilogy.
Well, just look at it this way. For the last few years of the SNES life cycle, there was a pack-in bundle that was the SNES and 5 games. 4 were various Mario games. The 5th one was Donkey Kong Country, and that's what was on the front of the box.
you have an item to sell, you better sell it.
Yeah, like you had a bunch of Mario games, including Super Mario World, which is, in my opinion, one of the better ones. But Donkey Kong was on the front of the box.
Yeah.
That is how big this series got.
And that is probably because it is one of the best looking games on the system.
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
absolutely.
no, easily. And the soundtrack, too. The soundtrack is, like I said, the music is absolutely fantastic.
Yeah,
It hits all of the buttons.
I would argue that there are probably quite a few games on the N64 that don't look and sound as good as Donkey Kong Country.
Oh, I would subscribe to that argument as well.
Yeah, I'd say Donkey Kong 64 is one of them, to be honest.
Well,
okay.
I think DK64 looks quite nice. But
I've never been a massive fan of the N64 shaggy graphics.
I think that's a whole conversation to be had, is that, most Super Nintendo games still look really good, even being pixel art, because the pixels don't age as poorly as the polygons in the N64 do.
Yeah.
This is true. This game also doesn't make your eyes bleed.
Yeah, no, this is this one looks great. I mean, and this one I think they made minor tweaks to the graphics over the first one, not in a super noticeable fashion, but it's the sequel, so they did minor tweaks here and there.
I can't remember what it's called either, what the method is called, but it's when they render a really high polygon 3D image, and then they basically just rotate it and snap pictures of it, and then compress it down. What is it?
Digitized graphics.
Yeah, but yeah, they took all of the everything. They took everything and they rendered it in 3D, much higher than even like the Super FX or honestly probably the 64 couldn't have even handled polygons that high. And then they would snap pictures of it at different shapes that they wanted, different angles, and then they take that and compress it down into a 2D sprite. And what you got was those really clean, very high detail sprites.
Yeah.
And it was brilliant. And then you had basically the similar technology that they did for Mortal Kombat, and it didn't look as good.
But yeah, I mean, it was, one of the top games. I mean, second best-selling game of 1995, sixth best-selling game on the system. Like, Donkey Kong Country was number 3. So yeah, I mean, even if it's not as good as its predecessor, it's a damn good game.
Oh yeah, no. And no one here is going to disagree too hard, I don't think, on that.
Yeah, it's still a good game. I just didn't feel that it captured the magic of the original.
And that's fair. I mean, it's just, I feel it's as far as tech and, what Rare was doing and, how they were developing as a studio, I feel like this was kind of the apex, at least in terms of this series. But, that's just how I feel about it. But anyway, I think we've talked this one, to death. So we'll take a quick break, have another musical interlude, and go into our next game. Our next game is, I'm sure you can tell, Super Metroid. One of the most, it's one of the biggest titles on the console. Whenever I talk to people about the Super Nintendo, they always mention Super Metroid. Several friends of mine rate Super Metroid as one of their favorite games ever. And having now played it, I can see why, because that is a very good game.
I would go as far as saying it's not just one of the greatest games, it's one of the most revered games.
Oh, definitely. One of the things that I think, I did hear this elsewhere, but it makes sense to me, is that Super Metroid is what they had in their mind when they made the original Metroid. They just didn't have the tech to make it happen yet. It feels like hey, this is finally where we want it.
Oh, yeah, no, definitely. That's, it's kind of like a fully realized, but you also have to remember that Metroid 2 came out on the Game Boy.
Yes.
Previous to this, and not by a whole lot either.
No, it was very close to release date.
But even that felt like kind of a different game. I don't think you've played it. I think Adam has played Metroid 2.
I played AM2R, which is a Metroid 2 remake. So I sort of played it in a sense.
Okay.
Yeah, I played about
saw-
half an hour of the remake as well.
Yeah, I have a digital copy of Metroid 2. I have only done a couple of minutes. I've not really delved deep into it because I was saving it for later.
Yeah, no, it's a different feeling game. It's more linear. It did
You
not.
go from one place to another, just taking out the Metroid systematically.
Yeah, it feels more linear than any of the other games,
Right.
especially the very, very first one. But Super Metroid really establishes the formula that not only impacted Metroid, but the entire Metroidvania subcategory.
Well, yeah, I mean, Super Metroid is the Metroid of Metroidvania, just like Symphony of the Night was the Vania.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the Game Boy Advance games, Zero Mission and Fusion, they pretty much look identical to Super Metroid.
Yeah, they
they'll be polished up, but it's pretty much that style.
right. They are very much based on Super Metroid and what it established.
Yeah.
And that's another reason I feel like Super Metroid was their vision, because once they got to that point, they're like, okay, now we have our baseline that we want. Let's start expanding it and making it better.
Yeah,
it just took them 8 years to do it.
I mean, it's sort of interesting in a way as well, because the way they took the story. Are you aware of the story of Metroid 2, those who haven't played it?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm not really aware of it.
Basically, the galactic government or whatever is not happy with Metroids, so they get Samus to go and basically commit genocide and kill all of them. So she goes there, systematically kills every single Metroid, but then escapes with the baby Metroid, if I'm right, or like an egg or something.
Yeah, it's a baby that hatches right after you kill the Metroid Queen.
Does the whole duckling thing.
Yeah, it follows you out. And then that's when you get that end screen that's the last Metroid is in captivity, the galaxy is at peace, which they reused for the opening Super Metroid.
But then the Super Metroid game, where you go back and investigate stuff, it sort of feels in a way like a remake of the first game, because you're revisiting a lot of the same areas, you find a lot of the same bosses, and you've even got the same final boss in a way until the twist.
I mean, you even find the Morph Ball in the same spot.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah.
So it's definitely follows a lot of the same pattern as the first game, and I say it does sort of feel like a semi-remake. I mean, it's not, because it is, chronological sequel, but you do, I say, like a lot of the same things, go to a lot of the same places, get a lot of the same items, but there's just more to it, and it's like, okay, this is our original vision, but with technology.
Right, and then later they made Zero Mission to take that original game and, fit it to what they established with Super, which is why when you play Zero Mission, the world is teeming with life. Even the small little things that just kind of move around the screen, they don't affect anything. But there's so much more life there, whereas in Super Metroid, it's all desolate because you've already wrecked the planet once.
Yeah. I mean, for me, Zero Mission feels like a better version of Super Metroid, really, because obviously it's the same locations and stuff like that, but you've got more life to it. Everything feels a little bit tighter. You've got more moves.
Well, and at that point, they've made improvements. They've taken some of the stuff from Fusion, and they've done, it was gonna be technically a better game because they had so much more to work with. The Game Boy Advance is basically just a smaller Super Nintendo, so they had similar hardware, but more experience and more stuff to work with.
Going a little off topic here, I always thought that the Game Boy Advance was basically a smaller Super Nintendo, but the Game Boy Advance is apparently a 32-bit console.
Yeah, it is, but that's why all the Super Nintendo games were ported to it, because it was finally strong enough. Yeah, it was finally strong enough to put those games on there.
And then some.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's 32-bit. That's why the sequels to Super Metroid, the Fusion, and obviously the remake of the original game look better, and they're a lot more expanded because it can deal with it.
And the colors pop too.
Yeah, and that's why there's a lot of games that are actually improved from the SNES. Like you got A Link to the Past, and A Link to the Past came with something else.
Four Swords.
Four Swords, that's right. So obviously it got more power than the SNES. So yeah, it was 32. I think I've heard that
It has
before.
advanced power.
Yeah,
Advanced.
basically. I feel like, if someone says, oh, Fusion's my favorite, or Zero Mission's my favorite, or, even Metroid 2 has its fans, I don't think any of those answers are wrong. Me personally, I feel like I lean towards Super, but I think because I recognize that from a design perspective, Super is the well from which all else springs, basically. Where, without Super being as good as it was, we wouldn't even have Fusion or Zero Mission.
Yeah, and I would go as far as to argue that we wouldn't even get the modern Castlevania build if it wasn't for Super Metroid.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
because
Castlevania
up until Symphony of the Night, Castlevania was still rolling with a sort of level-based progression.
yes.
And then Super Metroid happens, and it sort of brings this... And it wasn't the first game to do a Metroidvania style, because... Was it Blaster Master? Master Blaster? I always get them flipped around.
Blaster Master.
Blaster Master was very Metroidvania-ish as well, but it was a SNES game, and it didn't have as much going on. And it did Metroid a little bit better than Metroid.
Mm-hmm.
But then Super Metroid comes out in all of its 16-bit... It comes out in all its 16-bit glory and establishes this format, with a map and big bad bosses.
Yeah.
And it changed everything.
Well,
and stuff everywhere as well. I mean, the good thing is, whenever you've got like a new item, you can go back to all the previous places, and you've got loads more to do just finding secrets. There's always stuff to go back to and do with your new stuff.
Well, and one of the things I wanted to say about Fusion is I think one of the reasons Fusion was so good, and I can see that now having played both it and Super, is that they took this formula that was so successful and so, well done with Super and immediately corrupted it and, changed so much and changed the character that it had a big impact. And that's why that game stuck out so much, because it was deliberately corrupting Metroid into something else.
We had the Metroid Prime games before Other M.
But what I'm saying is, when they were developing Prime and Fusion, like Fusion became, the change to the series, and Prime, it continued what they had established with that particular gameplay format, just in first person instead of 2D.
And it's funny because, I don't hate Other M for its gameplay.
Did I say Other M earlier?
You're talking about corrupting. I just naturally assumed you're talking about...
No, I was talking about Fusion, because Fusion went to a more linear style and had the quite literal corruption of Samus as a character.
Oh, I thought you were talking about corrupting the series and the gameplay.
No, I was talking about Fusion corrupting the formula and changing it to this more linear narrative focus.
I don't get many people whining about Fusion, though. People do kind of complain about Zero Mission because it literally says go here and gives you the statues to go to that open up your map or give you really good clear maps.
But then Fusion does that too. You go to the terminals and it says, okay, there's a thing here, go here. It does kind of guide you very specifically to places.
It does guide you, but then there are good chunks where he just goes, you need to go over here. Yeah. Power's down, good luck.
Well, and I don't say corrupt in a bad way. It's that they made a deliberate decision to change so much about how Metroid worked in that game and how Samus as a character was in that game, that it made for a very different experience, which is why it's often brought up as an example of a horror game, because it's much more
atmospheric.
It's got a lot more of those elements, because they made that deliberate decision to change things so much.
Yeah.
Well, I found that a lot of the horror aspects you can find in Super Metroid as well. I found it like a really atmospheric game. It's down to the music, the environments, which at the start, when there's not a lot of enemies around, it does seem like really, really barren. And you're kind of hearing sounds, and you've got that kind of electronic kind of music thing going on with just the beeps and boops that sound kind of like a computer kind of thing. it gives off that kind of like Alien vibe where you've just got this desolate place and you feel like you're being stalked, kind of. In Metroid Fusion, you are literally being stalked, but Super Metroid, it just gave that kind of feeling of dread.
Because you know something's going to jump out. You know you're going to
Yeah.
stumble into a boss fight eventually.
I think the thing is with Super Metroid is it is a horror game because of the general atmosphere, whereas Fusion has that, but also because it's more linear, it knows exactly where you're going, so it can
Right.
direct specific scares and specific moments
Right,
to
specific
build
set
into a
pieces.
focused horror experience rather than just a general horror atmosphere. I
Right.
think is what you're driving at.
Well, yeah, and one thing that really helps Super Metroid in that regard, and I wasn't able to really give that because as much as I love Fusion, Super Metroid better sets the tone with the music. And we started off saying that everywhere you go sets a feel for that zone.
Mhm.
I don't know what it is, but I hate being in Meridia, and it's not because it's a pain in the ass to navigate.
It's the music.
It
Yeah.
just sets this really creepy tone, and nothing bad happens there.
For
Well, and
me,
You fight
I
one
think
boss. You
top
travel
two-
through it like 3 times, and you fight one boss, and I hate every second I'm in Meridia.
I didn't get
Is it
some Meridian on this.
Brinstar where Kraid is?
Yeah, Brinstar Depth.
Yeah, Burst Our Depths, yeah.
Yeah, because that's definitely my favourite tune. Every time that kicks in, like, I don't want to leave this place. So amazing.
I think my favorite tune in Super Metroid would be the Brinstar Red Soil. And they reuse that, and you would recognize it. They reuse that in Metroid Prime 2. They do a remix for the Torvis Bog.
Okay.
And it's a really, really good remix. And to anybody who likes metal, now I'm not going to be able to remember the artist's name. He has a Metroid metal album. The band is Stemage. He has a Metroid metal album, and it's just, it's so good.
So one thing about Meridia, I didn't get there on this particular run, but from what I understand, it's all water, but it also has that thing where, like in the real world, the further down you get, the weirder and more alien things get. Doesn't that also happen in Meridia?
Yeah, you come across some weird creatures in Meridia.
So I think that's probably another element of Meridia's atmosphere is, coming across the weirder stuff.
No, but Meridia, it's not a super dangerous area. I believe Meridia is home of Dargon, who is the big bad boss of that zone.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's just a creepy area. And you don't spend a whole lot of time there, but you spend enough that, I don't like it. I would actually prefer the Haunted Ship. And that's actually a spooky zone.
I'll tell you what I don't like. I don't like the fucking wall jumping in this game. What a pain in the ass.
No,
that is.
it feels a little weird, especially after you play Fusion and Zero Mission, where it's nice and clean and tight.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easier once you get to grips with how it works, because while you're going around and you're spinning, once your feet's touching the wall, so you have to look for the animation where the feet's touching the wall, that's when you've got to do the wall jump. If the feet's not touching the wall, then you just won't do anything.
Right.
So you've either got to get the timing or you've got to look for the specific animation where her feet are on that side of facing the wall.
What a very specific mechanic.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, but it's a fucker to do. Like, the first time, I remember the first time I played Super Metroid, it was probably the first Metroidvania I'd ever played. And I got stuck in that hole. And they give you the wall, well, they basically say you've got a wall jump, basically. And it's like, okay, I can't do this. And then I just was stuck there for like 30 minutes or something. I used to get like halfway up and then fall down and then, oh my God, it's so frustrating. Like, now I can do it. But even then, it's not like 100% of the time because it's so specific, so awkward.
Right. And like going in, I knew the wall jump was there, but I just wasn't able to do it. Like, and I know there's all kind of sequence breaks and stuff you can do with it.
Oh yeah, that's one of the good things. You can use the mechanics, and you can explore how you want using the mechanics.
Yeah, you can actually do the bosses
in speedrunning routes, and it's completely different to how you would normally play it.
Yeah, you can actually do the bosses in reverse order if you want.
Yeah.
Well, not even just that. The reverse boss order is actually a speedrun category.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
that's how big it is.
To be honest, but yeah, but still, that's a testament to the game that you can play in whatever order you want, because that's how the game's mechanics allow you to do it.
I had a lot of trouble with the wall jumping as well, but I have to say, in terms of like the controls overall, it didn't feel great for me. I mean, I kept accidentally going down into the morph ball when just like moving around, like generally jumping around, and it's like I don't want to be the morph ball right now. It just it felt a little bit awkward, which I think kind of like tainted my experience a little bit, because it is, I'm not going to say it's a bad game. I'm generally not a fan of sci-fi in general, but I did like the atmosphere of the game. I did kind of like the setting of the game, and it's an enjoyable enough experience. But the controls just had kind of like a barrier for me, you know.
I think that the controls are... It feels like if the controls were really tight, then the game would be almost perfect, I would say, because in terms of like the level design and the atmosphere and everything, I think it's spot on. But I think the controls are not quite tight. I mean, even just stuff like normal jumping, you have to do a very specific kind of jump to jump without spinning. To just do a straight jump up, you have to jump and then press left or right.
Yeah, and
then
you've got the floaty jumps and all that.
So, like, when, for example, right at the very end, which, you know, I don't know if you got that far, you beat the final boss, and then you have to do an escape, and you climb up these tiny platforms and you escape. However, it's awkward as hell.
Yeah, I mean, my introduction to this genre really was in Symphony of the Night, and the controls in that are so tight and so precise that really kind of like adds to the experience quite a bit. And
I mean, this came first, so I mean, you do have to kind of give it some leeway, but I do agree with what you're saying. I think the controls, they feel like your exploration is kind of hindered by the controls rather than helped, and I don't think that should have been the case.
Well, and this is one of the things they corrected when they went on to Fusion and Zero Mission, is they made the jumping and the controls so much tighter, and it, you know, that again, that's one of those things that they made better as they went on and got more experienced. And it's, you know, honestly, like, yeah, I agree. Like, I as much as I really like this game, and it was, you know, they clearly designed it around the floaty jumps, you know, it probably would have been a lot easier for people to experience without the floaty jumps.
Definitely. I mean, when it comes to the game, that's my biggest flaw. But otherwise, I think it's a really good game and really enjoyable. Whenever I go back to play it, I do have a good time with it. But I know that that's going to be one of the things I have to face and have to overcome every time, is I've got to get used to getting back into that control style and how it controls.
Yeah,
Which,
and
as I say, I mean, there are good things because of the movement set. As I mentioned before, you do have that freedom to tackle the game effectively as you want once you're comfortable enough with them, but they could have been tighter to make that a little bit easier.
Yeah, as someone who is not super great at games, it is, you know, it is a challenge for me to deal with some of that stuff. The one thing I will say that this control-wise has over the ones that came after is just the fact that it has more buttons allows you to have that run button, so you're able to vary your jumps more. That is the one thing that I think they had to give up moving forward that is unfortunate, because they just had less buttons to work with.
Yeah.
And it was not even that so much that it had less buttons to work with. It's they streamlined the controls as a whole, because like they also had the weird option. I believe it's off by default, but in your option menu you have the moonwalk feature where you can charge and walk backwards, and it's not particularly helpful. It's neat, but it's not helpful.
But then again, it was never really helpful, like in Symphony of the Night, which also has a backslide.
Well, the backslide, I mean, you could at least, well, I don't know, you travel really fast when you're backsliding across down a hall.
Really, I'm sure that's not the intention, to move around the castle backwards. I'm sure they didn't intend for Alucard to be Michael Jackson. So
I did that a lot.
I did too. If there was a hall there weren't really any enemies in, I was going down it backwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a beneficial side effect, really. But if you were to use it as intended, shall we say, as like an evasive technique, I don't think I ever used it for evasion. I can't think of one time when I actually used it for evasion. I think I did what you guys did and just used it to travel down empty corridors.
Well, it's like sidestepping across Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time.
Yeah. I did use it for evasion in a couple of instances, but it was like very specific enemies that I used it for.
Yeah, so it's not quite as useful as an evasive technique as... I mean, if they didn't have it, you wouldn't necessarily need it, shall we say.
Right.
But like in later Metroid titles, they because like what you mash select to rotate through your anything.
Right, and
that's weird because you have missiles, super missiles, power bombs, your grapple beam, and then in later games they just went, these all have a button.
Yeah.
You can cycle through your missiles, you have missiles and super missiles, and then your grapple beam is a button, and your bombs, they didn't make it weird. They streamlined it and they lost buttons as a result.
Yeah.
Because they were actually putting them places.
Yeah, but they just a simple fact that Game Boy Advance had less buttons than the SNES controller.
Yeah.
So they streamlined it out of necessity. It's just that's one of the only things that I feel like I'm gonna miss going back to those other games is that run button for the varied jumps and not having my Shine Spark automatically turn on.
Oh yeah, you don't have to crouch, do you? You just stop and you can jump.
Yeah.
I think you'll miss the lack of convoluted Shine Spark puzzles when you get into Zero Mission, and I think you know exactly which puzzle I'm talking about, Adam.
Oh yeah, with a Shine Spark, yeah.
Where you have to like use it and save it 7 times in a row, then fly across the universe.
Yeah, isn't that just for that's just for a power up, isn't it?
It's like for a power bomb or a super missile tank. It's not even something great. It's just I can go get other ones.
I think I've seen a video of
like
that one.
Kind of a varied maze, and you just keep on having to save it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the crouching really kind of becomes irritating then.
It's not easy.
It's something you do once, shall we say, just for 100%, and then you don't bother.
Yeah. And then you skip it every other time.
Yeah, exactly.
So now you said that you beat Crocomire, right,
Yes.
Steven?
Yeah, I beat Crocomire and then got stuck in Norfair because I'm not good at games and was saved in a place with low health.
Okay, and how far did you get, Matt?
Not very far. I think I beat like 3 bosses. I got past the one that I was initially having trouble with. It's like a circle and it opens in half and you got to shoot missiles in the middle of it.
Oh, the Spore.
That took me ages and ages to do.
You have to cheese him.
I believe it was another boss after that I wasn't able to get through. I don't remember which one. I mean, it's about a month since I played it at this point.
I'm trying to think what comes after the Spore.
I don't remember. My memory's terrible.
Well then, Adam, what's your favorite boss in Super Metroid?
I don't know. I want to say Kraid. And I don't know if it's just because I'm hyped up because of the music at that point that I'm kind of really up for it. And the fact that Kraid goes from being this pathetic little thing from the first game, who's probably smaller than Samus, to being this big hulking behemoth thing.
He takes up 5 screens.
Fight. Yeah,
it's great because they fake you out with a false Kraid.
Yeah.
They fake you out with mini Kraid.
Yeah.
Because it turns out that Kraid isn't a character, Kraid is a creature.
Right.
Yeah. So when you come across a young Kraid, you're like, oh, lol, it's Kraid. And then you shoot him with a handful of missiles, you're like, that's it. Then you walk through the door, and then Mama Bear's in there.
Yeah.
Although, interestingly enough, I did learn that you could actually drop Kraid in like 30 seconds and skip the majority of the fight.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it just super missiles?
I think it's something like you have to jump and shoot twice with a certain time frame, and the second shot will stun him, and you can drop 3 super missiles into him and drop him.
Oh wow!
And at that point, he doesn't even rise up. He just sinks down.
That's hilarious.
He basically just gives up.
Yeah.
You can basically do the same thing with Ridley if you have enough super missiles right out of the gate.
Mm.
You can roll up to him and he'll scream and start flapping, and you can just dump all your super missiles in him, and he goes down in seconds.
Yeah.
But it's kind of hard to get all of those super missiles.
Yeah, and the thing with Kraid is like it's such specific timing. The timing is based on the lag of the fight loading. So
okay.
Yeah, it's one of those.
So, like, yeah, no. Okay, that makes sense. It's just an exploit.
Yeah, it's very much a speedrunner trick that I just heard about.
I would probably say my favorite boss in Super Metroid is Phantoon, and you wouldn't think that, considering how much I yell and swear during that fight. But I actually enjoy the fight.
Yeah, now that you say it, I think Phantoon is definitely kind of up there. I really like his design. Mm-hmm. He's not one of the characters that you really remember when you think of bosses from that game.
Right.
But then when you think back to it, you think, yeah, he was a cracker.
And it's funny because when if you get into the Metroid lore, you look into like, oh, what is Phantoon and why is Phantoon here? Is he a space pirate? From what I can gather, Phantoon is a fourth dimensional creature that Ridley or Mother Brain just sort of cut a deal with. He doesn't have any actual investments.
He's a mercenary ghost?
Kind of. He's just like, hey, want to help? And he's like, I don't got anything better going on. Whatever. Sure, why not? This sounds fun. But yeah, like he's and then I guess later on, when you beat the shit out of him, you get a grudge out of him because spoiler alert, Other M, you fight him at the very, very end. He is the ultimate boss of Other M.
Huh.
And his design is really cool there. Too bad the game sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I've only ever played like maybe 30 minutes of Other M, and I keep giving up because it's pretty bad.
It's pretty bad.
I plan on going through the whole Metroid series probably sometime next year. I still haven't decided if I'm going to play Other M.
I mean, I'm definitely going to play through it at some point. I know that I will be it one day before the end of time. And every time I play a bit of it and think, maybe another day.
Nah, I mean, I feel like I'd rather play AM2R than Other M.
AM2R is very good, though.
I've heard it's fantastic.
I wasn't actually expecting it to be good. I thought it'd be pretty terrible, but it's actually really good.
Yeah, but I mean, we can save discussion on that for if we ever cover fan games or Metroid 2 for that matter. But yeah, I mean, do you guys have anything else? I mean, I think we've covered a lot here. The only other things I would say is, I think we've mentioned the music once or twice. Like, the music is that good, y'all. Like, I know I harped on this in Secret of Mana, but this one also has just fantastic music. They just had really good composers back in the day.
Absolutely. It's the atmosphere of the music really does fit with the game.
Yeah, I mean, the music is awesome. It's definitely the best part of the game for me. It's just spot on, pretty much every single level.
And that's just sort of Nintendo's trend with the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, I mean, the music was always incredible. And what's crazy is, with the Final Fantasy series, pretty much all of that music is one guy, Nobuo Uematsu, I think. But, with the rest of the Super Nintendo library, it was all different composers. I mean, obviously Grant Kirkhope was one of them, but it's all different composers, and they all just, ended up being in the same place at the same time, and we got a lot of great games as a result.
With Nintendo games, like Nintendo IPs, the primary composer was Koji Kondo. Yeah. He could basically compose all of Nintendo's music.
Yeah, I think I want to say his name came up when I was looking at stuff for Donkey Kong Country.
Because he started up on the NES with Super Mario Bros.
Yeah.
And he's done... Let me pull up his Wikipedia here, because he's done so many games. He composed in Punch-Out!, Super Mario Bros., Legend of Zelda, The Lost Levels, Mario Bros. 2, Mario Bros. 3, World, Pilot Link, Link to the Past, Yoshi's Island, Super Mario 64, Star Fox. Oh, that's funny. He didn't do the Metroid series. He did everything but the Metroid series. Star Fox 64, Super Mario 64, Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Sunshine, Wind Waker. Well, that makes a lot of sense. New Super Mario Bros. Galaxy. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. The soundtrack to Galaxy and Galaxy 2 is just so good. Oh, Odyssey. He did Odyssey as well, so there you go.
Oh, okay. So apparently I was incorrect. Grant Kirkhope didn't really come along to the N64. He did compose for the Game Boy once.
Hirokazu Tanaka did the Metroid series.
David Wise, that was the other one. He's the one that did Donkey Kong.
So one thing that we've touched on briefly, which I think deserves kind of at least a little bit of discussion is the legacy of Super Metroid. Basically, it did kind of kickstart an entire genre, and so many games have come from that. I mean, we talked a little bit about Symphony of the Night. Even into the modern day, you've got games like Sundered, which kind of follows that same kind of feel and aesthetic. I mean, Sundered's a roguelike, but it has a Metroid feel to it. And
I mean, you've got like a million Metroidvania games these days.
And it all kind of sprung from this game, really.
Things like SteamWorld Dig have a very Metroidvania tone.
Yeah, Dead Cells fits very well with the one person up against the world thing.
Yeah, Dead Cells is somewhat similar to Sundered, actually.
Yeah, it's another roguelike Metroidvania style, just more emphasis on the roguelike than the Metroidvania. And like I said at the top, it is, a lot of people have said it's one of their favorite games. It is one of the most iconic games on the Super Nintendo, and for good reason. Like, there is a reason I picked this game for this episode, because while I hadn't played it, I knew how important this game was and how important it would be to talk about it when talking about the Super Nintendo and its legacy.
Definitely.
Even though I did have issues with it, I can definitely see that the impact that it had definitely makes it like a really, really important game. Like I said, I didn't hate the game. I wouldn't even say that I disliked the game. It just wasn't really for me.
Right, and that's totally fair. I struggled myself. I just, I was able to push through it. Just the stuff didn't bother me as much, but I totally get your viewpoint because I've had those problems with some of the other stuff we've covered. So, like, I get that. But you recognize that this game is on that level, and it is that quality.
Yeah, definitely. It just needed to be a little bit tighter in the controls, and I found some of the things a little bit too difficult, but that was probably down to the controls, to be honest. So just with those little tweaks, which they did improve on in later games as well, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, but I do still see its worth, and the atmosphere of it, like I said before, is phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth the experience just for that.
As like quite a major horror fan, that kind of thing is like really up my street.
Well, and I feel like Metroid is probably the closest. For a long time, it was the best we had. It was the closest we had to an Aliens video game.
Yeah.
Because like the actual ones weren't this good.
That's what I said about Metroid Fusion. It was the best Alien Isolation game.
Yeah.
Well, the funny thing is, eventually got Alien Infestation, which was a Super Metroid clone, which is ironic, really, seeing as a Super Metroid was basically a rip-off of Aliens.
Yeah. Everything comes full circle.
All the tangled webs we weave.
And I'm pretty sure the reason that Metroid got a female protagonist was pretty much because of Ripley and Alien.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it was such a heavy inspiration to Metroid, or to, Metroid. Alien was a heavy inspiration to Metroid. It's just what was going on. He loved it.
Yeah.
That's where Ridley got his name.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, so I think we've covered this one pretty in depth. So I think we'll take another musical break and come back with our last game. All right, our final game, and the one a lot of you, I'm sure, have been yelling at your listening devices, is Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting. I will be completely honest here. I did not play this game back in the day. The first time I actually played this version of Street Fighter was in preparation for this. This is here because it is one of the most iconic games on the system. You talk about the SNES, most people talk about Street Fighter II. I mean, in fact, Street Fighter II was actually a factor in the SNES getting a lead over the Genesis, because the Genesis didn't get it for almost a year after the SNES did, which I found very interesting.
That's what happens.
It's Street Fighter. We all know how Street Fighter works. We all know what it is. This is just the big one. Like, Turbo was the one that added the faster game speed, and it added some moves and then, character balance, which, nowadays we get those in patches, but back then balance came out with different editions.
Right, yeah, they couldn't patch it. They're just like, here's Street Fighter 2, here's Super Street Fighter 2, here's Street Fighter 2 World Warrior, here's Street Fighter 2 Turbo, here's Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting, here's Street Fighter 2 Final Edition. I mean, for crying out loud, Street Fighter 2 got a brand new edition on the Switch a couple years ago.
Yeah.
A brand new edition. Fucking
yes.
Yeah, no, it was really impressive because they took Street Fighter 2, tore it down, then rebuilt it from the ground up for
Why?
the
Just
Switch.
put on new Street Fighter 2 games. Why are there a million Street Fighter 2s? I don't understand it. Yes, it may have been a good game. Yes, it may have been a massive step up from the original. But Jesus fucking Christ, it's like we would be here half an hour listing Street Fighter 2s if we were to name all of them. There's a million different versions. I mean, Jesus Christ.
Okay, so we have, I think, Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior was the initial release. And then there was Special Championship Edition, Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2, which was basically just Turbo with a little bit of extra stuff on it. New Challengers, and that's the last one on the SNES. Everything else, there's HD Remix on PS3 and 360, and then Ultra on the Switch. And it's like, really? I wanted to go out and find a physical copy of this game, and I ended up getting the wrong one because there's so many of them.
Well, and that's the other thing. On top of that, I was reading a few years ago about Street Fighter 2 because I was curious about why are there so many different things. Oh, it was ported to fucking everything, too.
Yes.
Like, this was on the Commodore. It was on the ZX Spectrum. That I didn't believe for a second. But yeah, apparently it was on the ZX Spectrum. Yeah. It was on the Atari. It was on the Amiga. It was on the Game Boy. It was on the Master System. It was on the PlayStation. Like, it's been everywhere always. But what I found out, because we know about the official releases, apparently, like, Street Fighter 2, I was reading into this a couple years ago, had all sorts of what were boiled down to, like, ROM hacks to make them slightly unique in arcades.
Yeah.
So yeah, you have your 15 official releases, but then you probably had 100 various little tweaks.
Yeah.
Where like everything is rainbow and crazy, or everybody moves even faster than hyper fighting. Honestly, Street Fighter 2 was sort of a world sensation. When you break it down, I mean, there's a couple reasons why it was such a sensation. One, it was just a massive upgrade to the fighting genre as a whole.
Right.
That's just at its core. It just played a lot smoother. You had more moves. The sprites were better. It was just good. But it also birthed the combo system, and it was a complete accident.
It wasn't even the peak of the combo system, because Killer Instinct is where the Ultra combo and, that whole thing came from.
But what I'm saying, yeah, no, but it was actually like, it wasn't just like, it didn't peak it. It literally accidentally invented a combo system. It was it was an exploit using game's frame data where you could seamlessly move into more moves by inputting during certain frames, and it would cancel out the last moves, and you could get moves out faster. And then you could get true combos going, and it literally accidentally set the bar for all fighting games after that.
Like you said, it redefined fighting games. Like it was a big deal.
That's why Street Fighter 2 is so famous. It still has too many editions. And when you look at it, another thing that helps, Capcom. It's a Capcom game. It had great music. Already said that. Guile's theme goes with everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one thing that all four of our games this month have in common is they all have pretty good music.
No, yeah, definitely.
When I was young, I actually had a cassette tape, which was like the Street Fighter 2 soundtrack, but it was played by real instruments. And
Nice.
It was fantastic. I mean, I've got no idea where that cassette went. It was absolutely awesome. I wish I still had it. But the music, like every single track in that game is iconic. Every single one. And you can immediately recognize it. You immediately know which stage it is. They're all brilliant.
Street Fighter 2 birthed a couple different animes. And of course, the legendary and critically acclaimed Street Fighter the movie featuring Jean-Claude Van Damme.
And Raul Julia.
Yep.
And Street Fighter the movie got a game adaptation. So there's a game adaptation of a video game movie that was based on a video game, which is just insane.
Well, what is even better is it's Street Fighter the movie, the game. And to be fair, it's actually not a bad game.
Well, I was just going to say, it's actually the only Street Fighter game that I enjoy, which may be a little bit of a bold statement, but I will go into it later.
You can go into one thing it has, and this might have been done in the Alpha series. I'm not 100% sure, because I never played the Alpha series, but Street Fighter, the movie, the game, has grab reversals. If someone grapples you, you can do an input and you can grapple them, and then they can actually reverse it and grapple you, and you can stack that up to like 5 times or something like that.
I did not realize that.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
You see, one of the things that gets me about this game, and the whole genre, to be honest, is that when it comes to fighting games, I really suck at them. I can usually pull off some of the simpler combos. Like, for example, in Mortal Kombat, if I play Scorpion, I can obviously do his get over here move and a couple of other ones. But when it comes to like move inputs, I just can't do them. Like, you know, in Mega Man X and X2, how you can get the Hadouken and Shoryuken. I really struggle pulling off those moves. The Hadouken's not so bad, but the Shoryuken, or whatever it is, I can never pull, because you actually have to pull off the move you do in the fighting game in Street Fighter in order to do it. And I just can't pull it off. So I earn this bonus move in Mega Man X2, and I can't fucking use it because I can't.
Yeah, the Shoryuken is counterintuitive in its input anyway.
It
but I mean, that's my main problem with fighting games anyway, is that when it comes to like the combos, I'm just not very good at inputting them. Which
I'm terrible at fighting games.
So usually I can appreciate fighting games that have some simpler combos, like some of the more modern ones obviously have them, and even some of the old ones have some, you know, simpler combos. But I generally suck at fighting games. I play them on the lowest difficulty, and even then I can struggle. And I usually have most fun when I'm playing against another human player, hopefully someone that sucks as much as I do, because I'm just not very good. I don't hate the genre or anything. Like, I do enjoy quite a few fighting games, like Mortal Kombat, for example. But that's one of the things that sets me against the genre for a lot of them, is I'm not very good at them.
Well, the thing is, Street Fighter 2 was designed to be played with a fight stick. And they tried their best to kind of like replicate that style on a control pad. And it didn't quite work as well. I mean, I have trouble pulling off a lot of the special moves on a pad. But if I'm sat in an arcade, I mean, when I was growing up, this was in all the arcades, and I played this a hell of a lot in arcades growing up. It is a lot easier with a fight stick in an arcade to pull off these moves. It really is.
It is. I got a fight stick a while back, and I sat down and played some Street Fighter 4. I originally played Street Fighter 4 with the Xbox controller, went back and played some with the fight stick, and it was just like, oh my god, this is night and day.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, like, you know, nowadays there's only so many people that'll have fight sticks.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, Street Fighter 2 is one of the biggest games on the console. I mean, it was, you know, number 5. Well, actually, okay, it's number 5 and number 9 on the best-selling games of the SNES list.
It's pretty good when you make it twice.
Yeah, like, we all recognize, you know, this game is important. This game was good.
Definitely.
It's just, you know, You know, I'm not a big fan of fighting games, so I'm not terribly...
No, but I think that Street Fighter 2 does belong on a highlights list, because obviously it was amongst the best-selling, and it's because of its historical impact on, I mean, not just on the genre as a whole, but really as a culture.
Yeah.
In pop culture, it's a huge historical impact. It has stood the test of time so long that even 30 or 20-something years later, it gets a new release, much apparently to Adam's distaste.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, even though I'm not a massive fan of the genre, I do appreciate that mechanically, the game is really solid.
Oh, it's so tight.
It's weird because have you ever played the original Street Fighter?
It's awful.
I have, yeah.
Have you ever
It's-
played Street Fighter 2001? I think it's called. It has nothing to do with the series, and it's awful.
But yes, Street Fighter 1 is just wonky as hell. And this one, it feels really tight. Now, the one gripe I have about it, and this is what makes me not a fan of the series, is that I don't like any of the fighters. And that for me is the main sticking point for a fighting game. When it comes to the fighting games, as I say, I'm rubbish at them. So the thing that, really grips me, like with Mortal Kombat, is the fighters. As long as there's, like at least one fighter that I can, appreciate the moveset or the design or something, then perfect. But none of them click with me. They all seem boring. I mean, not as bad as, say, Virtual Fighter, where they're all just kung fu artists. But, like, none of them. Like, Blanca's seems like a very different style of character because he's this green monster. But even then, I don't click with his moveset, so I don't even want to use him. And that's the thing that puts me off with Street Fighter. And Street Fighter the movie, because I love that film, playing as Jean-Claude Van Damme or Kylie Minogue.
Oh, wow. Okay,
is-
so I was
that-
joking
no,
earlier.
No, honestly, it's actually, I don't know, it's like on other platforms, but on the Saturn, it plays just like Street Fighter, but with digitized graphics, with the, the real actors. So I'm perfectly serious when I say that it's the only Street Fighter game I actually like, because I connect with the characters because of the film.
Well, I was just saying, I was joking about the Street Fighter movie being good.
Oh, Street Fighter movie's excellent. Are you joking me?
I mean, I appreciate some of the lines in it, but
Oh, I mean, it's terrible, but it's one of those films that's terrible in a good way because it just is absolute ridiculousness at its finest. I mean, Raul Julia obviously makes the film, but
I was gonna say he's the best part of the film.
yeah, but even then, there's still good stuff. I mean, the fact that he's Jean-Claude Van Damme, he's Austrian, isn't he?
No, he's Belgium.
He's Belgian, right? So they've got this Belgian muscle-bound guy to play the all-American hero. What's that all about? It just doesn't make any sense. And like loads of the dialogue is just shit.
Terrible.
But it's shit in a charming way. It's one of those things where video game films are notorious for being shit, but a lot of them are just kind of bland and you just get bored of them. But this is kind of, it embraces the shittiness and it's glorious. And I really like the film. I don't like it as much as the Mortal Kombat film, but I think as a film, it's still really entertaining. And I like it a lot. I mean, hell, my grandmother loved that film. She's never even knew it was a video game, but she likes action films. And she was like, oh, the Street Fighter film's really good. And she didn't know it was a video game movie. She just thought it was a cheesy Jean-Claude Van Damme film. And she loves it. So, it's not one of those things that you can appreciate for cheesiness sake. People do actually enjoy that film, and so do I. And as I say, I appreciate the game as well. The game is basically mechanically the same as Street Fighter 2, but with digitized graphics. And that's enough to make me connect with the characters. Whereas the original Street Fighter, I just don't really appreciate. I don't really like any of the characters. And that for me is the main flaw with Street Fighter 2, which is nothing, serious for the game itself. I can't criticize it for that because mechanically it's great. And for a lot of people, they do like the characters. But for me, I kind of like the weird characters of, say, Mortal Kombat or, like the Darkstalkers video games or, stuff like that where things are a bit weird and a bit daft. And this doesn't really have that.
I mean, I also like all the weird characters of like Mortal Kombat 2. You have Yellow Ninja, and then you have Green Ninja. There's Blue Ninja. And then there's Purple Female Ninja, and there's the Blue Female Ninja. Oh, I heard that you can unlock, if you're really careful, you can unlock the Gray Ninja.
But yeah, I was going to ask who everyone's main is, but I guess, Adam, if you're not really into any of the characters, you wouldn't really have one?
Guile.
Didn't really have I kind of played as a bunch of different ones just to try them out, but the one I played as the most was the one that's not Kylie Minogue. I don't remember her name, but it's the one that's not Kylie Minogue.
Cammy is the one played by
Chun-
Kylie Minogue.
Cammy,
So-
that's the one.
Yeah.
My main has always been Ken. I always pick Ken. I know that's probably the boring answer. I don't care. I just like Ken.
I used Ryu purely because of familiarity with him from Smash Brothers.
Yeah, that's fair. I always did Guile. I like Zangief just because he hits so hard. That's just sort of my style in any sort of fighting game. I always go for the high hit, tanky characters. And it usually backfires on me, but it's okay because I still have fun. But in Street Fighter 2, for the longest time, I played almost strictly Guile because he had a really cool kit. And that's just kind of Street Fighter in general. I always try Guile first, whatever new issue or version comes out, because he has a good kit.
Guile's the one with the hair, isn't he?
Yeah. Fun fact, real quick about Guile, and interesting in Street Fighter. In Street Fighter 4, because they didn't really have a whole lot of speech in Street Fighter 2. It wasn't like super clear or anything like that. In Street Fighter 4, though, in the American, if you switched all the voices to English, he would just sort of grunt and yell. If you whiffed a grab, he would just be like, ah. If you switch it over to Japanese and you whiff a grab, he very audibly says, shit.
Nice.
And it's not, like, as far as I can tell, Street Fighter 4 wasn't rated T for language. But yeah, Guile just, you miss a grab. Oh, shit. It's like, oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that. So he's the rough and tumble one, because he's edgy and uses bad words. And that's why I like Guile.
And that's why they got Jean-Claude Van Damme to play him in the film.
Yep, because he's a rough, tumble guy, and he uses bad words. Because they're gonna go downriver, and they're gonna kick those sons of bitches' asses so hard.
But yeah, I mean, it's Street Fighter 2.
There's not much you can say about Street Fighter 2. It revolutionized the genre, and it became an international sensation.
I mean, we don't even really need to talk about it. I mean, it's, again, one of the games on the SNES Classic.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, honestly, there's so much stuff that's so well known about Street Fighter 2. We probably could have just gone, and the last pick was Street Fighter 2. Bye.
Yeah.
It's a good game. See ya.
Bye. Yeah, that everyone knows.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think we need to keep beating this horse. So we'll take another quick break, and we'll come back with our picks for the month. All right, so our 4 games for this month were Secret of Mana, Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Conquest, Super Metroid, and Street Fighter 2 Turbo. I think for me, I picked all of these, so I don't know if I'm allowed to pick, but for me, my favorite of the month would have to be Super Metroid. It's just a fantastic game.
I'm going to agree with you in that Super Metroid, just even if it hasn't aged as well as it could have, it still has aged well, and it's just absolutely fantastic. It set the standard for the Metroid series. It's just a romp to play. I'll sit down and play Super Metroid once a year because it's just that good.
What about you guys?
My favorite this month, mostly because I kind of grew up playing it in the arcades. I spent so much time playing against other people, and even though I'm shit at it, it's got to be Street Fighter 2. It is easily the most iconic game on this list. It's one of the most iconic games of all time, and it's something that I have a lot of fun with, preferably with another person, but even if it's just with the AI, I can have a lot of fun playing Street Fighter 2, although I do prefer the Mega Drive version to the SNES version.
Probably because you grew up with a Mega Drive, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's mostly down to the 6-button pad.
Yeah, that does help.
And if you ever find modern, what is considered a fighting pad that's not a stick, there's 6 button faces, so
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Well, for me, I mean, Street Fighter 2, I can appreciate that it is a good game, but I say this one's just not for me. As for Super Metroid, as I mentioned before, it does have some issues, and out of the Metroid games I've played, it's possibly not the lowest one, but it's close to being the lowest one.
I was going to
But-
say, have you played the original?
You see, I actually have a massive fondness for the original. Yeah, I actually like the original a lot. I mean, it gets overshadowed a lot by, Zero Mission,
Yeah.
but I actually have a lot of fun with the original one. I think it's one of those games where, well, I did have a lot of problems with it first because I started playing it and I never got very far. I just got annoyed with it. But then once I sat down and just forced myself to the end, by the end of it, I had a great time.
No, that's fair.
Obviously, Super Metroid's better than that. And I would even say better than Metroid 2 as well. Although I've only played the AM2R remake of Metroid 2, which probably doesn't count.
I've played the original version of Metroid 2. I would say Super Metroid is definitely better.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to include Metroid 2 or AM2R because one's fan made and doesn't really represent Metroid 2, and the other one I've not played. So in that case, I would probably rank Metroid at the bottom, even though I do like it a lot, and then Super Metroid, and then the others. Maybe Metroid Prime 3 is below Super Metroid. Anyway, even though it would be on the lower end of the scale, I do enjoy Super Metroid quite a lot, and that would be the reason why it's my pick for the month. Because even though I do have gripes for it, and as I mentioned when we discussed it, I don't think it quite deserves the flawless reputation that it gets these days. It very much has Ocarina of Time syndrome, where everyone says it's the best game of all time, and it really isn't. But unlike Ocarina, as I say, Super Metroid is a really good game, and deservedly so, despite the issues.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, that would definitely be my pick for the month. I had a lot of fun with it. I didn't beat it this time, but I have beaten the game a couple of times before, and it's really good. And yeah, that's my pick for the month.
So we're all in agreement. I don't think we had any bad games this month. I
absolutely
think,
not. It's a Super Nintendo. There weren't many bad games.
Yeah, that's the thing. Then that's the whole point of this episode is, the Super Nintendo changed gaming.
Yeah, I mean, I can't really criticize. I know I did criticize, more or less all of them to varying degrees. But even with, Secret of Mana, I can't really say it's necessarily a bad game per se. There was a lot of things I didn't like about it, but I think a lot of it stems from the fact that I don't really like RPGs, and a lot of those kind of mechanics that are built into it and things with the story just kind of sets me against it from the offset. I think it's one of those things where, as I mentioned when we discussed it, it's one of those things that's probably good to pass the time between the next big thing, maybe.
Yeah, that's fair. So anyway, that's our SNES console special. I think this is our last console special for a little bit.
This is our last of the main console specials. We are going to do more console specials in the future, but it's going to have a slight different angle to it than this one. This one we had the mainline home consoles, but there's going to be a twist next time. But that's not going to be until I don't know, next year or something. So
lemon lime twist.
In fact, this also marks our final episode of this format. We're going to be having a massive overhaul as from next episode and doing things slightly differently. And I'm hoping things work out for the better. We're still having a similar kind of format in terms of evaluating various different games and our different opinions on them. But we're also going to be taking things in a slight different direction. Don't want to reveal too much, but this will be the last of the old-style Retro Odyssey.
Oh, God, will we be referring to these old episodes as the Retro Odyssey?
This is Retro Odyssey now.
Or are we just going to become the Odyssey?
No, we tried that, remember?
Yeah, we tried being Hyper Odyssey, Turbo Edition, Fighting, plus Switch Edition.
I think that was it.
It was exactly it.
In the last episode, we ran a competition to win a copy of Yooka-Laylee on the PS4. And basically you had to go and share the post. Unfortunately, only one person entered, but that did make it a little bit easier to pick the winner. So we ran a random number generator, and it turned out that the one person who entered was the person who won. And that person is Jane Aerith Magnet. So congratulations on winning a copy of a game that we kind of all really disliked, but that is now on its way to you.
I didn't dislike it, I just didn't like it.
I did.
I think it would have been a lot funnier if the random number generator
Pick someone different.
generated someone else. Like it picked someone else.
It's like you're giving a number between 1 and 1, 3. But anyway, we'll be back next month. So until then, goodbye.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Peace.